Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa usalli wa usallam ala Sayyid al-Awwaleen wal Akhirin Nabiyyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabi ajma'in. Wa ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, in this part 4 of Deeper Roots, the history of Islam in the Americas, we want to look at Muslim presence in the Americas before Columbus, the first journeys. And it's very important for us to understand at the outset that it was very possible for the Muslims to have done this. And when you actually look at our literature and our experience, it is very probable and almost without a doubt. And I can recall having made this postulation. As a historian in the University of Toronto, I was challenged by the historians of McGill. And they brought me to Montreal and asked me to make my thesis. And I showed them about Islamic civilization. I spoke about the first journeys. And they submitted. And they admitted that it was very possible. And they accept the fact that Muslims could have been in the Americas before Columbus. But how is this possible? This is possible because of the great achievements in science and technology that had happened in the Muslim world, and that Muslims were traveling all over the planet. You find that the Arabs, actually, before the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, they were traveling down East African coast, and the Omanis and other southern Arabians were going into Southeast Asia, Indonesia, up into Korea, Japan, China, before the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the technology on the sea, the navigation, was there. And when Islam came, it gave strength to the previously experienced sailors and gave them a new lease on life in terms of their technology. And that is because, by the very nature of Islam, a Muslim is interested in astronomy. We have to make salat. And in order to make salat, one of the conditions, shurut sihat salat, is that you face the Qibla. And in order to face the Qibla, you have to know direction. So if you are north of Mecca, you have to face south. If you are east, then you got to face west. And so the direction, the position, our position on the earth in relationship to other portions of the earth and also to the stars as a means of knowing our direction became a very important science. And it was the Muslims who were able to make the science of astronomy into a precise science. And astronomy is not astrology. Astrology is using the stars and the heavenly bodies to tell futures. This is not. This is the physical science of astronomy. And this is where the Muslims excelled. And they were able to develop the magnetic needle. And from this magnetic needle, they were able to develop the first true compass. Now, this compass is an astounding achievement because this enables a person to be traveling through the ocean in darkness with clouds, but still know the direction. And from this came astrolabe, quadrants, sextants, and a number of seafaring instruments, which gave Muslims an advanced understanding of navigation. When you put this together with the books of geography and history, you find that we were easily capable of traveling throughout the planet and mapping it and understanding it. In 830, al-Ma'mun, who was one of the Khalifas of the Abbasid period, Banu Abbas, he opened up a place called Bayt al-Hikmah. And Bayt al-Hikmah was what you could call today a think tank. And so he called together the scholars of India, of China, of Africa, of Europe, of the Middle East, all different parts of the world. He gathered them together in a think tank. And so you didn't have to be a Muslim to be part of the think tank. it's similar to what happens today with Oxford University, Sorbonne, Harvard University, University of Toronto. Scholars are brought in from around the world, given stipends, scholarships, given positions, and so it is the knowledge of people from all around the world that makes up the present day progress in science and technology in the West. Similar to that, the precursor of that, what is happening in the West, happened at Bayt al-Hikmah. And so the scholars were gathered together, and from this understanding, Ma'mun commissioned al-Farghani to look at the ancient understanding of astronomy, and he published a work which became the leading text on astronomy in the world for 700 years. This is the level of achievement that the Muslims made in terms of the sciences. And it's amazing to look at the books and whatnot, because you'll see the scientific diagrams, but then you see Arabic. So most people attribute Arabic either to Islamic studies, Quran, or to Arab newspapers and whatnot. But this is science now, which is being shown in the ancient times clearly with the Arabic language. And so this technology, this natural feeling to travel, because Muslims wanted to make pilgrimage. And so therefore, they would travel from the Far East. They would travel from China. They would travel north from Chechnya. They would travel deep down into East Africa, across the Sahara Desert, crossing lands, crossing nations. And there were scholars who would write a type of historical, geographical guidebook to help them go across. And so they would use this understanding to help them cross the desert, to bring them down from the mountains, across the oceans, and to be able to make the connection. And with the great unity that Islam gave to the world, scholars who were living in China, India, Africa, Europe, Asia, all over the Muslim world were able to travel across barriers. Arabic is a language that united them. They were able to access texts. They were able to speak to each other, to communicate. And it developed a type of scientific, educational, cultural unity that enabled Muslims not only to share information, but to share experiences within their countries. And there are a number of very famous travelers who were able to traverse the lands, and with their knowledge of Islam and their courage, they could go to different parts of the world. One of them was Ibn Battuta. And Ibn Battuta, you could say, was maybe the greatest traveler in history, even greater than Marco Polo, because he traveled over 75,000 miles, and this is documented, whereas Marco Polo's is not necessarily documented because he didn't write his book until long after he came back and somebody else wrote it. But Ibn Battuta's can be directly traced back to him. He traveled, Ibn Battuta, 75,000 miles without modern technology, without modern means of communication and transport. He left in 1325 from Tanja, or Tangiers in Morocco, and he spent 30 years on the road. And it's very interesting to see the journeys of Ibn Battuta and the places that he had gone to and the experiences that he had. This is not the subject of our discussion. We are talking about the history of Islam in the Americas. How does this come in? When we look at some of the great historians, geographers, we find a number, and I want to talk about three from the large number. In this case, in 956, approximately, there is Abul Hasan al-Mas'udi, rahimahullah. And he wrote his book, Muruj al-Dahab wa Ma'adan al-Jawhar. And he is considered to be the Imam of the historians, a very important person who traveled the known world. He went down deep into southern Africa. He traveled to India, to China, all the way to Korea. And he drew a map of the world around 957, which could be considered one of the oldest maps in the world that shows the Americas. And so Muruj al-Dahab wa Ma'adan al-Jawhar is an amazing text. And in this book, or a section of the book, he spoke about the journey of Hashkhas ibn Sa'id, who left the shores of what is now Portugal, this is Lisbon, left the shores, went into the Sea of Darkness. This is during the time of the Muslim rule. Went into the Sea of Darkness, and after a period of time he came back with goods. And this was known all over the lands of Al-Andalus, the amazing journey of Hashkhas. What could he have seen? How could he go into the Atlantic Ocean if the Atlantic Ocean led to a drop and there was nothing else because the earth is not round? How could he come back with goods if there were not people on the other side? So he encountered people, and he actually brought back goods from his journey into the Atlantic Ocean. In 999, Abu Bakr ibn Umar al-Quttiyah also wrote a text concerning the journey of Muslim seafarers who went into the Sea of Darkness and they returned back, and it was recorded. In the 11th century, al-Sharif al-Idrisi, Abu Abdullah Muhammad al-Idrisi, rahimahullah, he is considered to be the top map maker, cartographer in the golden age of Islam. And he is credited to have made a globe for Raja I, the king of Sicily, who he worked for a period of time. And he actually made a globe showing the roundness of the earth. And in it he was showing the sources of the Nile, and he was giving information known by ancient people, but he's able to bring it all together in a globe-like form. And in his book, Kitab al-Mamalik wal-Masalik, he wrote the journey of a group of Maghrib, of these seamen coming out of North Africa and Al-Andalus. And he wrote the journey, about the journey of these seafaring Muslims who went into the Sea of Darkness. This is the Atlantic Ocean. And they found a deserted island. There was only animals on the island. They left the island and they went to another island, moved around, and finally they were captured by a people. And they were brought to a king. And this king spoke to them through a translator who could speak Arabic. So the people on this island had enough contact with Muslims that they literally picked up enough Arabic to communicate. And so they communicated and told them that there's a journey of a month or so between you and the lands that they are coming from. And so this is amazing, because this is showing clearly not only that they go into the Sea of Darkness, the Atlantic Ocean, but yet they are encountering people and they are returning. In traveling the islands myself, Bermuda was not really inhabited by people until after the British came. And if you go from Bermuda down to the Bahamas, then you will find people, or it could be a section of the Bahamas, Allah knows best, but he encountered people on these islands. And they came back and their information was made known to the people of the Muslim lands. And if you look at the map of al-Mas'udi, if you look at this map, you'll see the arrow that I have, and it says Ard Majhula. So this is how the map looked, which is published around 957 of AD. But if you notice, it's sort of like upside down. Let me turn it around for you. So if you turn the map around, you will see Africa, which is a roundish type of shape. If you follow that, you'll see the Arabian Peninsula, and then India and the Isles of Southeast Asia. Go around to the top and you'll see Scandinavia. Then you'll see Spain. Spain is pretty clear. And then you see Italy, and going down into Turkey and modern-day Istanbul. What is important about it is that to the west of Africa is what is called Ard Majhula, unknown territory. And this is not Australia, right? This is outside of Africa on this side, not on the Asian side. So he knew about land. Somebody had given him information about land. He wasn't sure what it was, couldn't map it in a very distinct way, but he was aware of land in this area. And we still have the text up until today. And so amazing that it goes back that far. But still, the scientists, and I encountered this with the geographers of McGill, they want hard information. They don't want something that could be speculated on, but they want something that gives them more details and something they can actually connect back to see original sources. So this is now original sources in geography. And it shows us the map making of the Muslims, the penetration of Muslims into the lands of the Americas. And this comes out in a set of maps published by Peri Rais of the Ottoman Empire. And it is reported around 1517 that in this set of maps of the world, he gave to Sultan Selim I a set of maps that included a map of South America. And if you look at the picture here, you will see that this is the coastline. It is the eastern side, northeast of South America, what is now Brazil. And if you look close, you will see that the coastline is almost exactly what we have mapped today. And when the latitude and the longitude was checked out, it is almost precise to what we understand today. If you look at the map closely, you will also see Africa to the right. So therefore, the distance between Senegal and that coast there, Senegal, Gambia, and going right into Brazil, this is a fairly close distance. It's not a huge ocean like the Pacific Ocean. And so it is very possible to navigate this ocean at this point and to make it into the Americas. And what you also find is that what exists in the ocean is also currents. And the currents are literally magnetic pull in the oceans that seafarers understand. So that you will be in the ocean, it's almost like a river in the ocean, and it's pulling you in a particular direction. And so these currents literally pull people across, and there is a current that takes you from Al-Andalus, from Spain, North Africa. It will take you right into America. It can take you into the Caribbean area. There's other currents that go down. You can connect from that northern one down to one from West Africa, which will take you right into Brazil or land you in Barbados. These currents exist all over the world. And so these are the proofs. This is the hard evidence to show the presence of Muslims in the Americas before Columbus. That we had the technology, the currents were there, we had the science, we had the instruments, we had the compass, we had astrolabe, sextant, we had the scientific ability, the ocean is there, and we have the stories recorded in our text, which is still available up until today. And for details about this information, my book, Deeper Roots, that you can get at www.hakimquick.com, this will give you the actual source itself and give you a little more information about the journey. This is the hard evidence that the scientists are asking for. But still they're not sure. Because, it's Eurocentrism. And Eurocentrism informs the person that the only person who could do this is a European. How could a Muslim do this when you people lived in the Dark Ages? How could Africans do this when you live on a savage continent? That is Eurocentrism. And so, in order to defeat Eurocentrism, in order to confirm the ability of so-called third world people to cross the oceans, a Norwegian scientist, Thor Heyerdahl, he made a series of journeys into the oceans. And he went on the Ra the First from North Africa, and took him 54 days. He went on the Ra the Second, which took him 57 days. And it was on the Ra the Second that he had left from Safi, Morocco, and he landed in Barbados, which is in the Caribbean region. It's the most east of all the Caribbean islands. And surprisingly enough, this year we are celebrating the 50th anniversary of Thor Heyerdahl and the journeys that he has taken. This was an amazing trip, or I believe 60th anniversary of Thor Heyerdahl. It's an amazing journey that he made at that time. So for those who have a Eurocentric mind, who believe that it's only a European can do it, there's your proof. It's a European scientist who went to Africa, and he had indigenous people, African people, build his boat out of reeds, out of indigenous materials, African material. And he traveled across without using any so-called European technology. He went there, by himself. He was on this boat. He used the currents. He used the winds, and he left Morocco, and he landed in Barbados. And the people of Barbados came out to meet him. It was an amazing celebration. But what is really amazing about this, it's showing deeper roots. It is showing that it is very possible that African people, that Muslim people, could have gone across the Atlantic and reached into the Americas. And with this information that I brought to the geographers in McGill University, which is the top geography department in Canada, they submitted because they recognized that it's possible. Of course, in their questioning, they said to me, okay, you proved that they could get over. How did they get back? And my response was, that's not my problem. My problem, my challenge, my thesis is, did they come across? And yes, they did. And we have the proof. We have documented evidence written by people at the time. We also have the maps. We have the technology. And we have proofs in the Americas of their presence, that they actually came to this part of the world and they interacted with the people who were living in this part of the world. And so this is very important for us to understand. You as a Muslim, are you a foreigner? Are you a fresher? Did you just get off the boat? No. Some of our people were actually here before Columbus. Some of our people interacted with the First Nations native peoples. So we're not new to this land. We are part of the onward flow of civilization, of organization in this part of the world. And our technology has given this modern society the ability to make achievements, because everything is not wrong about modern technology. But it is, let's tell the truth. Tell the truth about where the sciences came from. Tell the truth about the journeys that people made long before Columbus, because he was not the first. He was not even the first European. The Vikings have settlements in Canada, in Nova Scotia, long before Columbus. So he was not even the first European. So let's tell the truth about this. Let's come forward and deal with our story and not his story. So these are the first journeys. These are the journeys of Muslims into the Sea of Darkness, who find the Americas and make contact with the First Nations people. It is a beautiful story that needs to be told, but at least it needs to be understood by Muslims, especially the younger generation today, so that we are equipped to take the criticisms and to take that feeling of being isolated or being foreign No, we're not foreigners. We're not just off the boat. We're part of this society. And what happens to this society includes us. And we are involved in the future. Because we want to go below the surface and we want to expose and bring out an amazing history that had been covered over for decades, for centuries, and now it is coming to the surface. And this will enable us to have another understanding of the people who live in this country or in these lands. It's very important to understand that African presence in the Americas is not based upon slavery. The majority of the African people in the Americas came as slaves and political prisoners. But there are also Africans who came before Columbus. There are Africans who came even in colonial times as free people. And so the slavery experience is the overwhelming one, because at one point in time, the governments in America and the Caribbean and South America had the black codes, Code Noir, where every person who was a person of color related to Africa was a slave, whether you were free or not. And so we want to look at African Muslim presence in the Americas before Columbus. Now, to do that, we need to step back and to understand that when Islam spread across North Africa, and we found that Uqba ibn Nafi', rahimahullah, the famous tabi'i, he went as far as riding into the Atlantic Ocean. And so all across North Africa, Muslims had developed an empire. And with the Amazigh, the local Berber people, they were able to develop strongholds in the north. And by 734, in the area of Tunisia, which was called Ifriqiya, and it's interesting because that's the original name for Africa. In ancient times, it was called Ifrigo by the Berbers and Mediterranean people, a sunny place. But it was Arabicized and put on maps. So the first modern usage, you could say, traceable usage on maps and in books of Ifriqiya, of the word Africa, was Tunisia. So if you said in those days, I'm from southern Africa, that meant southern Tunisia. See how words change. So in the northern part, the Muslims who were ruling in the area recognized the fact that there were trade routes that were going south across the desert and connecting with the people of West Africa. And the people who took you across the desert were known as Amazigh. These are the Berber people. There are a number of important trade routes. There was a trade route that took you from Tripoli in Libya down to Ghadames and then Bilma and into what is now known as Khanum Bornu area, which is Chad. It's around the Lake Chad area of Chad and northern Nigeria. There's another trade route that took you from Qayrawan, which is in Tunisia, down to Tahert, to Tad Mecca, and to a place called Gao. And Gao would be found in present-day Mali, and very famous trading center. And so these were the stopping points. And then there was another trade route that took you from Fez in Morocco to Sijil Massa, to Audagast, to a place called Kumbi Saleh. And Kumbi Saleh was part of the Ghanaian Empire. This is not the Ghana of today, but it is a Ghana that would include, in the ancient times, parts of Mali, parts of Mauritania, and going down south as well. So what was happening is, below the Niger River, this is West Africa, below the Niger River were active gold mines. And these active gold mines were producing probably more gold than anywhere else on the face of the planet Earth. And so the people who controlled these gold mines became fabulously rich. And the trade was going on between the south, the major port cities, was where Gao and Timbuktu and Kumbisale, and these areas in the south by the Niger River, and it was going north into the North African countries. From the North African countries, the gold was even going into Europe. That's why the British called their first gold coins Guinea, meaning coming from Guinea or the area of West Africa. And so these trade routes made the people in the area extremely rich, especially when the Muslims revolutionized the trade route. And they developed routes which were supported by oases. So the oasis is like when you're traveling on the highway and you stop and there's a gas station, restaurant, bathroom, there's a complex on the road. So literally on your highway through the sea of sand, there would be an amazing oasis. So the Muslims developed these and they revolutionized the trade routes. So at first, the major import-export was gold in the south, and coming from the north was salt. And salt, which is so important to preserve meat and to do a number of things, even in medicine, salt was worth its weight in gold. There were also other products that were needed, technologies that were needed, and these were carried. But really, salt and gold were the main products that were being traded in the early times. What also happened is that the caravans were carrying not only products, but eventually when Islam came, they were also carrying the message of Islam. Because the Amazigh people became, for the most part, Muslims. And so they were carrying it across, and ulama and scholars were traveling on the caravans. And so it is recorded that Islam reached the Mandinka people. This is the Mande people, a West African nation, back in the 11th century. And there is the empire of Takror, which is one of the ancient empires, along with Ghana and with Gao. And so in the 13th century, it first came in the 11th century, that's 1000s. In the 13th century, the king of Mali or Malel, he embraced Islam. And one of the great writers, al-Bakri, a famous Andalusian writer, writing in Arabic, his book is still there today. He talks about the encounter, a Muslim cleric with the king of the Malian people, and he gave him dawah, and Allah enabled him to embrace Islam. So from this Malian entrance into Islam came a major breakthrough for the spread of Islam. And that is that the Malian people controlled the gold mines. And their leaders were called Mansa. And so, Mansa meaning king. And so you had, for instance, and I'll use two of the most famous Mansas. There was Mansa Suleiman. And he ruled in Mali between 1337 to 1359. He built masjids, he strengthened Islamic culture. Ibn Battuta actually visited the area during his rule. And Ibn Battuta, in one of his journeys, he was impressed by Mali. He was impressed by the children studying Quran. He was impressed by the beautiful clothing the people were wearing. Also by the peace. He said it was the most peaceful, safe country that he had ever been in, and he traveled around the world. The next famous Mansa is called Mansa Musa. And Mansa Musa, Amir Musa, he became fabulously rich. And he made his pilgrimage in 1324. And he carried with him somewhere around 72,000 followers. Now, what is amazing about this is that they were traveling across the Sahara Desert. Just imagine this. These are the stories that our children need to hear about, not about mutant creatures and aliens. These are the stories of African leaders. This is what will raise the self-esteem of Africans and inform non-Africans about the exploits of African people, especially the Muslim community. because he was a great Muslim leader and he made his pilgrimage in 1324. And it is during that time that Mansa Musa, he carried with him 15,000 camels laden in gold. He changed the economy of every country that he reached. When he reached Egypt, he met the Mamluks. These are the Bahri Mamluks. The Mamluks, who were the greatest warriors in the world at the time, they fell in love with Mansa Musa. And they describe him as a pious leader who gives in the path of Allah. And they gave him a Mamluk bodyguard to take him for his Hajj. When he returned to Cairo, which at that time was the premier center of the world, or one of the premier centers of the world in terms of education and Islamic civilization, he offered to missionaries, to scientists, to teachers, he offered them stipends. He would pay their work in gold if they would return to him into West Africa. And so on his return, everywhere he went, he built a madrasa, he built a masjid, he strengthened the people, he empowered the people all along the way. And if you look at the map of West Africa, you will see in this map it is Timbuktu. And Timbuktu was probably the northernmost city on the Niger River that served as a middle point between the gold mines of the south and the caravans that were coming from the north. And Timbuktu, of course, has come into European literature and even our daily language as being a place that is somewhere lost in the middle of the desert. So they will say to you, oh, go to Timbuktu, meaning go to the moon, go get lost. Timbuktu was a center of trade. And when Mansa Musa came there, rahimahullah, he paid special attention to Timbuktu. He built a masjid there that is still functioning today. This is from the 1300s. And interestingly enough, the name Timbuktu, it comes from the name of a woman. Her name was Baktu. And Timbuktu, in the language of the Berber people in Tamashek, which is one of the dialects of the Tawarik, the Berber people Amazigh, crossing the desert, the men wear veils on their faces in the desert. The nomads were finding problems. When they came south by the Niger River, they were getting malaria from the mosquitoes and other diseases. And so Baktu, who was a merchant, who was dealing with the salt gold trade, she had a well dug about 12 kilometers north of the Niger River. And so it became known as Timbuktu, or the Well of Baktu. That well and that settlement spread out. The people of West Africa, the Mandinka people, the Soninke people, the Fulani people, Wangara, Songhai, the nations of West Africa, Arabs who had come down, Tawarik, who were coming down carrying the salt, came together in this amazing marketplace. And so at first it was a marketplace for gold and salt and other items, and then it became a center of knowledge. And the people of Timbuktu, it's living in a desert type of area, the most important thing to them beside their gold was books. And it was an amazing thing. And a famous Muslim traveler, of course, Ibn Battuta, he visited the place. And Hassan al-Wazan, Leo Africanus, he's called by the Europeans, he visited Timbuktu and he was amazed at the level of scholarship of the people of Timbuktu. And it is reported that in Timbuktu, at its height, every man, woman, and child was literate in Arabic. And at its height in the 16th century, that's the 1500s, Timbuktu boasted of 150 schools and a major university, Sankore University. This university enrolled over 25,000 students. Could you imagine this? Black Africans who are studying not only Islamic sciences, but they're studying astronomy, mathematics, geography, and it is from this area that our story to the Americas comes. If we step back to Mansa Musa, when Mansa Musa reached Cairo, he was interviewed by the reporter of al-Umari, rahimahullah. And al-Umari wrote his text, Masalik al-Abrar fi Mamalik al-Amsar, the journey of the enlightened people into the kingdoms of the world. And al-Umari wrote about Mansa Musa. And he was asked, how did you get this power and authority? And Mansa Musa said, I come from a lineage. And my predecessor, Abu Bakr, Mansa Abu Bakr, went into the sea of darkness with 2,000 ships. And he told the story of Mansa Abu Bakr. And that story was based on the fact that first he started with 200. He was interested in this ocean. And so he sent 200 ships out, and they got caught in this river. They described it as a river underneath the ocean. And it was pulling all the ships away. One of them managed to turn around and go back to Mali and to report what happened. Of course, this river was the current that was taking them in. You remember Thor Heyerdahl and what he had shown. And so then, with the gold of Mali, remember Mansa Musa, 15,000 camels laden with gold. And so they had the ability. They had the technology. They were connected with the universities in Morocco, Qarawiyyin, with Al-Andalus, with Egypt. They had the ability. He outfitted 2,000 ships, 1,000 for his men and 1,000 for his supplies. And they went into the Atlantic. And in recent years, it was found that they reached Brazil. And they traveled along the Amazon. They reached all the way to Peru. This is, of course, long before Columbus. Inscriptions were found in Peru. Some translated that man to pursue worship, to mature and become matter without life. Man pursues a cavernous place, a grave. They're showing the process of life. Okay? And these Mandinka inscriptions were found across the Amazon, in Peru, and all the way to the Pacific. And a Harvard University professor, Leo Weiner, who wrote his text, Africa and the Discovery of America in the early 20th century, he shocked intellectual circles. And he showed that these Mandinka people not only traveled in Central America, but they reached the United States. And they wrote inscriptions. They were talking about the elephants are tired. There's numerous birds. So they were actually in America, and they traveled up the Mississippi. And they interacted with the First Nations people. Now, what are the traces? What are some other traces of these early African Muslims? When the Spanish came into the region, Balboa, who the Spanish say discovered the Pacific, which of course was there for thousands of years. Okay, how can he discover it when the people have been living there for so long? But anyhow, Balboa. In the writings of Balboa, when he came to the province of Quareca, this is in present-day Panama, he found traces of African people. There were the native indigenous people that you would call Latino people, right? The native people. And they described to Balboa that over toward the Caribbean side, there were black people with beards, and they were fierce. Go the other way. And so Balboa went the other way. These were the African people of Guinea. And it's amazing what we have found. And the picture that you see here, as this is part of the collection made or shown by Alexander von Wuthenu. And this comes in his book, Unexpected Faces in Ancient America. And he controlled part of the museum in Mexico City. And he actually displayed terracotta, these carvings and figurines and drawings that were made of the ancient people in Central America. This picture here shows clearly an African face, and it has scarification, but also it's got a turban and a cap. That shows clearly a Muslim face. Alexander von Withenu made a series of displays in Mexico City in the museum, and he wrote this text, and he showed clearly these are not Mexican people. This is clearly African people who are there. Ferdinand Columbus even writes in his memoirs that when he came to Honduras, because Ferdinand reached the mainland, he found people, African-looking people, who had gold in their ears that literally hung down. And that is similar to the dress of the West African Mande Fulani people. They had so much gold, right, that when you give a dowry to a woman, she doesn't have a little piece of gold, a little stud. She's got a big piece of gold in her ears, a big piece of gold on her chest, a big piece of gold on her ankles. She has a major dowry, a major investment. And you could even, in some cases, put an egg through the earlobe because the gold was so heavy. He found the same look on the people of Honduras. They also found that Columbus, and Ferdinand mentions this, and Christopher Columbus, you see it in their memoirs, that the native people in the Caribbean, they called their gold guanine. And this guanine, they were shocked to find that the alloy of the gold, and remember, you don't just have gold, you mix it with other metals to preserve it. The alloy was 32 parts. It had 18 gold, 6 silver, 8 copper. It was similar to the alloy of West Africa, because obviously they knew that. That's the gold that they had been getting from the Niger River. So that the West African words of Ghana, Ghani, Kane, Kanin, Ghanin, these are actually West African terms. And this is what the native people called their gold. Also, we find in Central America that there are tribal names and family names that are still used by African people on the coastline in Honduras. Names like al-Mamis. And al-Mamis was the name for imam in Arabic. Then they would say imamu al-Mamis. Also Jara, Guaba, Kaaba. These are family names, and it is found in Central American anthropology that one of their anthropological groups is an African group, which is considered to be indigenous to the area before the coming of the Europeans. When the British came, they called them Black Caribs. They needed a way out. So Carib was being used for the native people of the Caribbean, meaning the Carib nation, Caribbean. So the British said, no, these are Black Caribs. They are African slaves who escaped, and they mingled with the people in St. Vincent and in Dominica, and then they were transported over to Belize and Honduras. These are Black Caribs. But the problem is, how can they be Black Caribs? How can they be escaped slaves when the Spanish ran into them? So before the presence of the Spanish, the Portuguese, British, French, they were already there. So this is an indigenous people. Today they are recognized in the Americas, in Central America, as Garifuna. And the queen of the Garifuna was even living in New York City. And when I wrote my book, Deeper Roots, and I mentioned the Garifuna, the queen of the Garifuna recognized the text. And I visited the Garifuna people in Belize. This is right below Mexico, on the Caribbean side on the coast, and you will see the Garifuna people. This is a distinct Caribbean nation. It's an African nation. And they were known for their monotheism. They also religiously did not eat pork. They had strong morality, strong family connections. And the Garifuna, alhamdulillah, they have been embracing Islam. And they live up and down the Caribbean coastline. And this is a trace, this is the presence of African Muslims before Columbus. And so there are a number of stories like this. Muslims were all over the region. When Columbus's people were going back, they report that they crossed a boat and they looked and they saw women covering their face. And they saw cloth which was similar to the clothing of Granada in Spain. And the Spanish knew well about Granada because that was the last empire. That was the last stronghold of Islam in Western Europe. And so the presence is strong. The presence is still there. The people know it about themselves. Our history informs us this. We have deeper roots in this part of the world. So nobody should say that we are newcomers. Nobody should say that we just got off the boat. No, we were here before Columbus reached the lands. And we need to strengthen ourselves. And we need to raise our esteem based upon our belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and also our knowledge of our deeper roots that go right into the history of the Americas. So I leave you with these thoughts and I ask Allah to have mercy on me and you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.